Before I start on this theory, if you already understand the breach from narration and canonity, feel free to skip to the section on Drexstrider and what's going on in the Meat and Candy timelines. Being not canon is not my explanation for the epilogue's characterization and story style. At the end of Act 5, Andrew Hussey gave us a spectacular 14-minute animation that broke the internet, an amalgamation of thousands of loose ends and plot points, effortlessly folding into a rapid-fire escape from the simultaneous deaths of two universes. And then, 2016, Act 7 arrives, and we all watch in rapt attention as he delivered 3 minutes of a frog becoming the universe, and the climactic battle with Lord English cutting away to a victory montage without showing us how he was defeated. Oh boy. The response was riotous. Fans claimed he'd written himself into a corner and simply given up on Homestuck entirely. People started to make their own endings. The thanks for playing stamped in the sky felt more like a cop-out than a resolution. But something didn't quite sit right with me. This guy? Give up on Homestuck? Write himself into a corner when Cascade revealed there had been things planned from Act 1. Throw away lines which became relevant. It didn't sound right. I began to notice something that had happened, a trend that seemed too consistent to be unintentional. In Act 6, the Cherubs are introduced, the two main ones being Calliope, which I know is pronounced Calliope, but bear with me, and Caliborn. These two have inextricable links to narration. Caliborn kills the author's self-insert in the story and takes over Act 6, forcing all of the action to happen in the intermissions instead. And Calliope, she dies early on, but sometimes she writes self-insert fanfiction of herself and her friends. But her Doom timeline self ascends to the god tier as the muse of space and narrates the Candy timeline. These cherubs are related to items called jujus, which also seem to be related to narration. For example, when the sucker juju is first used in Act 6, Act 5, Act 1, the angsty teen drama arcs of the Alpha Kids are interrupted by a sugar-high insanity where they resolve their arcs by deciding to get married and have a zillion kids, as you do. Notably, Dirk is not affected by the candy magic despite being infected by Trickster mode. When Hussey and the Alpha Kids are horrified by this mode once it ends, the Cherubs are delighted by it. They believe it to be a satisfying way to resolve problems. Little Cal is another juju which plays a very vital role in the story, but we'll come back to him, so it won't make sense until later. The house juju is where things get interesting. When Vriska discovers the treasure in the furthest ring and dumps out the house juju, John sticks his hand into it, and he gains the ability to retcon events. But we already have time travel. Davis had access to this for thousands of pages. What's the difference between retconning and time travel? The main rule we know about time travel is that it comes with a need to maintain cohesive loops. But I believe there's more to it than that. Take a look at this. In the pivotal moment when Terezi kills Vriska before she can leave a trail for Becknar to follow, she uses her Seer of Mind powers to see what would happen if she doesn't stop her. A seemingly innocuous line, certainly not one the Alpha timeline would allow, tells us that there are certain rules the Alpha timeline's following. John mentions that paradox space accounts for all of the actions people take, and that if someone doesn't do what they were meant to do, a Doom timeline is created. What are these rules? What are people meant to do other than follow cohesive loops? This is where the pattern emerges. Something I realized when the Vriskagram updates came out is that every time Vriska did something after John retconned her back to life, people in the real world would complain. That's you. The real world, that is, not people complaining. Anyways, she knocks the drink out of Rose's hand, cancelling her alcoholism arc. People who related to that arc and said it was really good representation were mad. It got retconned out. That's not how alcoholism works. You can't just knock a drink away and have it be over. The house juju is deployed at the Lord English fight, and it cuts away. Where's our ending? How did they win? People hated it when retconning happened, but people were happy with the changes that occurred when characters time traveled. And my theory is that the reason why this is because what the Alpha timeline is preserving is the narrative cohesion of the story. I recall a joke post I saw once where people were trying to find out a narrative arc or convention which hadn't been used in Homestuck. Shakespearean tragedy, Homeric epic, hero's journey, they could find an arc or a character that fit the criteria for all of them. I think especially the hero's journey is almost forced by the game mechanics of the burp, the sprite serving as a supernatural aid or mentor, the item on the P-Punch card allowing characters to cross the threshold, the Carapaceans on Death and Prospering, the consorts acting as new allies and enemies, and the death of the player's guardians acting as the death of a mentor, not to mention the repeated allusion to a specific ultimate reward, the creation of a new universe to rule over as gods. An animation like Cascade, then, is practically forced by the laws of paradox space to be something that is satisfying to us, the readers. Even though the kids broke the mechanics of the game they were in, they had yet to break the laws of narration that governed them. By deploying the house juju, John is able to break these rules. So what does this mean for Act 7? The battle against Lord English is meant to resolve here. He has unconditional immortality, control over time, power beyond that of the Green Sun. All of the characters who are meant to defeat him aren't ready. Dave doesn't want to fight him. Jake hasn't unlocked his hope powers yet. There he is, crying. Sorry. So Vriska comes in. She inserts herself into the fight with the house juju. And when she uses it to defeat Lord English, it is massive. It is way bigger than we last saw it. And as it slams down behind her, the story almost immediately cuts away. But according to this theory, that's exactly what should happen. She's using an item that breaks narrative rules to punch a hole into the story and allow it to cut away. It's a literal, massive plot hole. Of course, punching a plot hole into the fabric of your story has consequences. We've seen a glimpse of them through the previous retcons, people in the real world getting upset. And it's not really an ending to the story. What Huzzy dropped in 2016 was a fake ending that had to be called one by nature of the item they were using to defeat Lord English. So, fake ending drops. The credits roll. Thanks for playing, stamped across the blue skies of Earthsea, and Huzzy says, "That's all. Homestuck's over. Go home, everyone." 1 year passes with little more than a small batch of Snapchat updates that do nothing to resolve the narrative hole Vriska left, but people are flocking to mfpaintadventures.com to see if there's a new ending waiting for them. Nothing. 2 years pass, and as 413 rolls by again, there's a second, smaller rise by the fandom waiting for the gotcha moment where he reveals that Act 7 was a joke. Nothing comes. 3 years, and there are only the dregs of people left, the last hopeful gasp before people give up for good. The months trickle by, and people start to reject the canon ending of Homestuck. They write their own endings, their own versions of the story with new characters and new resolutions to the unstoppable Lord English. The readers of Homestuck refuse to accept Act 7 as an ending, and they write their own. And to us, Homestuck is about to stop being canon. On January 14th, the death of the fandom is on its doorstep. The last few holdouts are moving on to new media with new stories. Suddenly, the epilogue drops. 84 chapters of semi-canon continuation gets released, and in a moment I will never forget, my theory is confirmed as Rose says to John. You will need to travel back into canon and defeat Lord English. The House Juju has allowed them to defy narrative convention, and in doing so has caused us, the readers, to reject the story's canonicity. What's happening now? Are all the new out-of-character moments the result of this one plot hole? Have the kids really escaped from the confines of narration? Here comes the fun part. The Meat and Candy timelines drop with a reveal that Meat is being run by Dirk Strider, the Prince of Heart, and Candy is commandeered by an alternate version of Calliope that descended to the god tier as the Muse of Space. Now hold on. Dirk Strider is the Prince of Heart? This Dirk Strider, who tells Dave he's scared of becoming like Dave's foe, that he hates the flaws he sees in other versions of himself, and he worries about if these flaws will destroy him and fuck up the people he cares about, and he hates himself for them. Dirk, it's cool to worry about you could hug me, Strider. Dirk, I don't think you're cool, Dave. Strider, something is not right. Or something is very right, if you know where to look. In the same conversation as Dirk mentions that he's worried about all of this, he also mentions that he feels particularly connected to fragments of himself. On page 8060, Petterspite elaborates on this, explaining that Nepida's aspect is that of the heart, and the understanding heart is all about the nuances of the distributed self. They also mention that Dave's aspect of time helps in this further because time players get used to seeing different versions of themselves quite often. However, this is not the only thing making Dirk act differently. It may make him more in touch with his other selves. There's another layer in play here. That is the idea of the ultimate self. Jade and Dirk both mention the ultimate self in the epilogues. However, I know the characters in the epilogues aren't considered the most reliable narrators. Luckily, Dave Petterspite explains it as well. The way I understand the explanation is, a player gaining access to the ultimate self is like if you took a copy of every single version of you from every universe and every possible timeline and you stuffed it into one head. For Dirk, this would include iRRRRRRECONCILABLE and Pro. iRRRRRRRRECONCILABLE, who Dirk sucked into Little Cal with Caliborn and Gamzee in Caliborn's masterpiece, who gets merged with the TikTok Breakheads Hong Kong codes and Magic Cue Ball to make Doc Scratch, who dies and becomes Lord English. Not to mention Bo has had Little Cal in his possession for decades. So Ultimate Dirk has a copy of every single version of Dirk, and Bro, and Lord English, and Doc Scratch. And the Meat and Candy timelines are not being run by Dirk, Strider, and Calliope. It's being run by Caliborn, the Lord of Time, and Calliope, the Muse of Space. Now, when I was writing the end of this video, I was going to mention I felt that Act 6 might pull a Cascade, and that I had so many throwaway lines that seemed like boring tangents that many of these might become relevant in the epilogues, much like how, Acts 1 to 4, many lines suddenly became relevant in Cascade. However, I have now realized that one of the two lines that I had picked out to mention not only has become relevant, but references this very theory. On page 220, Rose kicks her journals under her bed, and Act 4 Dave reads them, one called Meow, and one called Complacency of the Learned. This book is then referenced by Roxy in Act 6, where it's become a series. The Complacency of the Learned poster she looks at depicts a chess match between Calmassus and Zazarpan, where Calmassus beats him through some unprecedented enchantment, which allows them to play beyond the death of their king. Later on in Act 6, Caliborn enchants his pieces and asks Calliope if he can switch the starting position of his king and queen. He later reveals that his enchantment was to put a hat on his king to make it look like his queen, and vice versa, and that he only asked to switch the starting positions, but he never really did. In doing this, he beats Calliope for the first time. And in the Meat timeline, Caliborn kills off Lord English and lives on to control the timeline as Dirk. Dirk is a metaphorical king disguised as a queen. He tells us all that Caliborn is dead, when he in fact is Caliborn, which means that one of the most contentious points against the epilogues, that it was only made because people complained about Act 7, can't be true. This was planned at the very least by early Act 6, and is first referenced way back in Act 1. I believe that Vods even tries to tell us that Complacency of the Learned is important. In Meat 16, she tells us that it was a pre-manifestation of a Seer of Light powers. On top of this, Caliborn's infiltration of the Meat timeline is referenced in the music in Act 7. In the extensive Homestuck discography, most characters have their own associated instrument or musical style, such as Terezi and harpsichords and Visca and heavily distorted electric guitars. For Caliborn, his is a very heavy electric guitar, sometimes mixed with EDM aspects, and you want an example of that? Look at Constant Conquest for EDM stuff. This shares a similarity with Dirk's musical signature, which is light electric guitar, especially in bro-related themes and retro video game style music. For example of that, take a look at Anbroids v2.0, which uses an emulator of the YM2612 sound card from the Sega Genesis. If we look at the Homestuck Beyond Canon music, there are two songs in particular that utilize Caliborn's musical themes much more than Dirk's. Take a look at Ultimate Dirk's theme, Now I'm a VIIlian. Heavy, crunchy electric guitars, interspersed not with Dirk's instrument but with Bro's light electric guitar, a symbol of Caliban's control over him, with only a tiny line at the end that sounds vaguely like Dirk's 8-bit style. And Split Reality is a barrage of EDM, mixed with lighter notes from Calliope, like many songs in the Cherubim album. And it literally references a song called Alpha-Matic Replacement. Also, I just realized when I was writing the script that he's actually wearing Caliban's shitty ripped-up cape from Game Over. Like, am I blind? How did I not realize it's Caliban earlier? And then I realized, actually, I made a post about this back in 2019, so we're good. I'll add a link to that in the description if you want to see some parallels between Caliban's Homestuck and the Epilogues, but like, no pressure, I don't get anything from it. Now that your minds have been blown, let's talk about the real battle that's happening in the Epilogues and Homestuck 2. Currently, the battlefield is one of narrative power. We have the Cherubs, natural narrators with narrative-related jujus and an ability to type directly into the narrative console. You know, which is where Dirk got that, obviously. But we also have some of the kids. John is aware that the candy timeline doesn't seem to mean anything, calling it kinda dumb and fake, and he and Vriska are able to change people's names in the dialogue log simply by speaking them into existence. Vriska, of course, has been trying to insert herself into the narrative from the beginning, in a move that seemed completely pointless and kinda egocentric until now. Even before the first usage of the house juju, Vriska dragged the story back to her unveiling the treasure she found in the furthest ring, when Hussy tried to shift the story back to Viceroy Bubbles von Salamancer. Being sucked into the candy timeline from the meat one, she quickly tears apart the story, asking why everyone is taking the secret police with guns seriously when there are literal gods on their side, summoning a line of cannons into the fray and using her luck powers to make every bullet coming towards her miss. Who knows what she'll do when she finds her way back to meat? And I doubt that her narrative influence is only because she's in the non-canon timeline. Even though none of these examples are from Meat, I believe that's because Caliban prioritized nerfing John, removing him from narrative relevance in Meat with the special effect of his bite, and because Vriska fell into Candy early on, possibly a reference to how he started his version of Suburb, with several planets being sucked into a black hole, allowing him to win later on. In fact, I'm not too certain about one being more relevant than the other in the first place. This one is just a theory, and I'm much more certain about everything else I've said, but I did notice a few things. The beginning of the Homestuck Epilogues is a fanfiction-style parody of AO3, done so to represent its dubiously canon nature. And the Homestuck Epilogues are written in a very different way to Homestuck. Rather than writing the entire thing himself, Hussy gave a general set of plot points to a team of writers, who then wrote out the epilogue. My question being, if this is done to preserve the semi-canonity of the story, and the meat timeline is canon and the candy timeline is not, why are they both written this way? I believe that the meat and candy timelines are simply Caliban and Calliope mucking about, making their own versions of the story. Where Act 6 splits between Hussy and Caliban's story, meat and candy moves between Caliban and Calliope, without the Anbroids sections that everybody loves. In fact, if you compare the characterizations of the characters in Meat to those in Caliban's comic Homestuck, they suddenly seem to be acting very much in character. Unfortunately. Vods, who is especially influenced by Caliban as he manages to transplant her into a robot body, she knows from Aradia can influence people's actions, and who spends the most time under Dirk's narrative influence. Seems dumbed down, quickly struggling to keep up with Dirk's conversation on philosophy at Meat Chapter 25, and going along with most of what he says without question. Even in Candy, the convoluted, half-sarcastic, passive-aggressive quoting that Vods and Kanaya seem to love is totally replaced with direct statements of love and Joe's affection, reflecting Calliope's basic understanding of the humans in the Flesh Quadrant. Now, before the real ending of this video, I would love to hear what you think is going to happen in the epilogues. Have I missed any major narrative-breaking characters? Will Terezi's ability to know when Dirk is narrating to her be important? Is this a red herring? Does Dirk's heart aspect, giving a greater connection to his splinters, serve only as a gateway for Lord English? Will this allow Brain Ghost Dirk to better understand what's happening with Ultimate Dirk? In all honesty, I can't wait to see how this all plays out. A battle in the narrative field, with canonity hinging on the audience. It almost feels like Caliban and Calliope are little kids trying to get their drawings in the fridge, and I can't wait to see how the story resolves. There's only one big update left after all, and in it, the real ending of Homestuck we've all been waiting for. Thanks for watching. In true Homestuck fashion, I've included bits of this theory that only seem relevant once you go back and watch them, so let me know in the comments if you find them. If you want to hear more rants like this one, come over to twitch.tv/darkespn11, hit that like and subscribe button. I'll be making a new video soon on the amazing animation that is Cascade and explaining what's happening in that rapid fire action-packed video, so click here if I've already made it. Into the den? See you then. On January 14th. I will kill you. I know that many people think that the characters in the epilogues aren't the most reliable narrators. You know, they could be terrifying. Jaden Burke. And Callio dies early on, and sometimes she writes self-insert fanfiction of herself and her friends. Very relevant. But her Doom Timeline self ascends to the god tier as the muse of space, and they narrate the timeline, the candy one. So, summoning a land of cannons, you know. Land of cannons and the fuckery that's low calf. So. Take 15! She's from the non-canon timeline. She's not from the non-canon timeline. She's in the... It's not a word. Just give me one for something change, gonna be alright. 3 minutes of a universe becoming... the fog. Go back to Snapchat updates. And no.